Welcome everyone to a very special episode where two wonderful podcasts are joining forces, My Breakfast with Boots and Sarah's Simply Equality, where we're coming to you today to talk about all things LGBTQ and mental health. Now, I'll give you a very quick introduction to me and then I'll pass you over to the wonderful Sarah. So my name's Rebecca, for those who don't know me, and I run my company Siendo. Now, Siendo is a mental health and wellbeing company where we offer corporates the training in mental health first aid, suicide first aid, mindfulness training, and also all things around wellbeing talks to give you the tools you need to support your own mental health and also support other people around you. And that's why I'm really excited about this conversation today, because being able to support each other, whether you're in the LGBTQ community or not, is really, really important. And now I have the wonderful Sarah with me today, who is an expert in this field as well. So Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Just thank you, Rebecca. It's a real privilege being able to share this podcast together. So yes, my name is Sarah Stephenson-Hunter. I am the founder of Simply Equality. And Simply Equality exists to break down barriers for LGBT and disabled people. So I do quite a lot of speaking and obviously have my own podcast. And really, I'm seeking to foreground the lived experiences of people who are both disabled and LGBTQ+, bit of intersectionality there, because I feel, as you said earlier, it's really important to share these experiences, and I come at this from a lived experience of both communities. So, yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. This has been very excited about this conversation. So this is a big topic, isn't it? And something that is really popular at the moment as well, in terms of saying people are actually starting to talk about it a lot more now, which is fantastic. And what I think is always, we were saying about this earlier, weren't we, Sarah, about when we talk about these subjects, it's really difficult to know what to say, how to say it, how to start a conversation. And so one of the things I thought would be quite handy to start on would be talking about language. Now, one thing, and I would love to kind of have your insight around this. So let's start on them really, really basic. So LGBTQ+, and also here it is LGBT, you have a whole different variations. Can you kind of shed the light a little bit more around that?
Honestly, Rebecca, we could do a whole podcast on language, because I know it's stuff that people do get quite anxious about. But yeah, I mean, the basic letters LGBT, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and by transgender, that's the sort of umbrella term for anybody that doesn't identify with the sort of standards of gender and what that is. The Q sometimes gets added on. That's either questioning those that are obviously questioning their sexuality or the gender identity, or sometimes queer. We can touch on that later. And the plus is really just trying to extend it out to anybody that feels they come within that LGBTQ plus umbrella. So it's just trying to be inclusive, because language has evolved over the years. It used to be LGB, now obviously LGBT and the Q and the plus. So it can be complicated, but those are the basics of those letters.
Yeah, brilliant. Because I do see LGBT used on its own in quite a lot of literature, like even with charities, inclusive charities, they'll not include the Q and the plus. And so is that still like correct to use?
I mean, it's correct. I would say predominantly it's probably just a question of shortening it, because obviously LGBTQ plus is quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
I would say most people that use LGBT, they're still seeking to be inclusive. I would say LGBT plus is probably a better option if you're not sure and if you want to save some letters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say generally, generally LGBT plus is the best option to use.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I like that. I like, see, I do. I'll trip up even on my letters.
Oh, so do I. And I'm in the community and I work in the sphere.
Yeah, it's very easy to do, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
So we're talking about that, and then also you mentioned the word queer. Now that's
Mm,
got quite a history around it, and it's had a history of a lot of negativity, a lot of abuse around that use of word. And then I was looking at the fact that it's been reclaimed in the 1980s, and people in the LGBT plus community took it back. So
mm.
could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, historically, you might have heard of things like queer bashing. The
Mm,
word queer was very much an insult, a bit like, gay was. It was often a word that got bandied around in the schoolyard, oh, that's so gay, as a negative.
mm,
Similarly, queer was the same. But you're right, it has been reclaimed. And certainly younger people, there's a lot of talk about queer community, queer culture, and you can even do queer studies at various universities. And so it's fine. I guess there is still a little bit of hesitancy by probably older LGBTQ plus people, because they still think of it as a word that was being used as when they were being physically abused or assaulted, or verbally abused or assaulted. So queer is fine. I would just put that caveat that if somebody else uses the word queer about themselves, fine. But probably if you're a non-LGBT person, just be a little bit careful to begin with when using that word and how you use it.
yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It can be very, very loaded and triggering for someone if it's
Totally.
negatively before.
I mean, it's a little bit like the word cripple.
Yeah,
I am a disabled person. I will jokingly use the word cripple sometimes, but it's not a word that I'd want somebody to use about me
yeah,
if they weren't disabled themselves.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, my mum's disabled. I would never ever. I hate the word crippled. I think
So do I, but
it's
I again, a little bit of intersectionality. So I'm also blind. I would sometimes use the word blinky, but
positive.
that's me as a member of that community
Yeah,
using that form of sort of fun, jokey shorthand.
yeah, yeah. And I think that really does bring into it, doesn't it? And you see it across the whole, the world of mental health as well.
Mm,
People use humor as a way to deal with stuff, as a way to
totally.
communicate, and also like sometimes things sit better with you about yourself if you can just bring a little bit of lightheartedness to it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the world of mental health. I mean, you're the expert, Rebecca, but there's so many derogatory words that get used that obviously we wouldn't use. But for somebody themselves who has mental ill health, wants to describe themselves as a term that you might initially think, oh, I wouldn't use that. Well, no, you wouldn't, but they have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's really good guidance in the sense of I always say don't lead with it yourself. I wouldn't
Mm,
if someone wants to, and I would even kind of caution that thing of joking and joining in, because
mm,
sometimes
mm.
someone might say it and I will give a smile and a nod to acknowledge that they're using that for humor, but I won't like really get involved in the laughter, because I
No.
always think sometimes when I used to work on mental health wards, I'd noticed some people would use derogative language about themselves almost to test the water to see what you think about them
Mm-hmm.
and what you
Mm-hmm.
think about their mental health. And so sometimes if it's too derogative, I would go, don't talk about yourself like that, come on. And I would like do it in a really nice way. But if I saw that he was damaging them and he was actually going to cause long-term kind of negative thoughts about themselves, then I would sometimes try and encourage them to talk about it in a more positive way. But if I can see they're just using it as a light-hearted joke, they're very like comfortable with it, then I'd kind of like just smile and acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of a minefield in some ways, but I think, as you said, the basis is let the person lead.
Yeah.
Because it might, it's the same within the LGBT community, the disability community, because of society's attitudes towards these issues.
Mm.
You might find some people with mental ill health have an internalized negative views of what it means to have mental ill health. you know some disabled people might have internalized ableism, some LGBTQ plus people might have internalized phobias around that. And I think a lot of that comes from, things are changing, but we still live in a world where to be different is still a negative, and there's still a lot of derogatory language, stereotypes around all these issues.
Yeah, there's a lot of history to language, isn't there?
Oh, honestly, totally.
And the beauty is it's always evolving, isn't it? I think that what I find is that it's quite hard for people to let go of language they've traditionally used. And so that's always quite a hard transition. If you've always called something, the certain generations, if they always used queer in a more negative sense, to try and let that go and reshape and reframe their language is quite a hard process for many, many people.
Yeah, I mean, I think my parents, they would have used those words, and they would have been sort of more negative in their day. But my parents weren't phobic, but it was just cultural, and it's the language that gets used, and things do change, but things take time to change. And again, I don't want to bash the media because I love the media, but the media has a certain agenda, and they're often slow to change in the way they use language.
Yeah, because there's people behind it at the end of the day, isn't there?
Totally.
So we've covered off LGBT, we've covered off queer. Now, obviously, a lot that's coming into discussion at the moment are things like gender and pronouns. And so when I think it's quite handy at this point to kind of almost identify that when we're talking about gender, that comes up in this conversation, we're talking about identity, so a form of identity rather than the biological sex, because they are two very, very different things, aren't they?
They are. Yeah, your biological sex is the sex characteristics you were born with. We have to mention it. It comes down to basics like your chromosomes and genitalia. So that's your biological sex. But then there are people, like myself, who describe themselves, well, not who describe themselves, but who are transgender. And for me, my biological sex doesn't match my inner sense of gender. And gender really, again, gosh, there's courses and studies on this, but your gender identity is very much how you relate to the world in terms of that innate sense of how you see your gender presentation. And again, it's complicated, it's nuanced. You get into the whole realm of gender stereotypes, gender roles. And again, touching on the conversation we've had earlier, that whole thing of gender queer, you might hear that. And again, that is people within the wider, broader trans umbrella that don't really associate or feel comfortable with that traditional binary sense of gender, i.e. male or female. So hopefully that helps the differences, but it can get quite complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why these pronouns are quite helpful then, aren't they? Because it helps people to identify, like, okay, so Sarah, I can see that you identify as a she and a her. That I identify as a she and a her. And then they can see if someone else puts something else, but they physically might not look that way to someone, it helps them to make that, like identify that difference for them between gender and sex.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all grown up, certainly like you and I, Rebecca, in a world where it was just assumed that, you were either male or female. And obviously none of us go around naked. So obviously you can't tell from the body.
Yeah.
Therefore, things like your clothes, your hairstyles, different things like that, the voice, that would all indicate your gender. Whereas now, as there is more recognition, although it's important to remember that trans and gender queer people have been around since like forever, but there's a lot more fluidity. So just because somebody may look like a more traditional man or woman, it's incorrect to make assumptions, and that's why pronouns are really useful. So it helps somebody like me as a trans person to know if somebody's put pronouns in their Zoom chat or in their email signature, to know that they may not be LGBT, but they're signaling that they're aware of the issues.
Yeah.
And also for me, putting on things, it helps me to signify people, okay, I probably look quite female. Sometimes I don't always sound as female, but I'm using those pronouns she, her, because that is how I identify. That's how I'm legally recognized. I mean, if in doubt, just ask, just say to somebody, can I just check what pronouns you use?
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. And I'd love to swing round to that a little bit later when we talk about how you can be an ally. And an ally is a person, isn't it, who supports those in the LGBT community.
Totally. And allies are really, really important.
Yes. And I think if everyone can kind of learn about how to be an ally and how to step in and support, whether they're part of that community or not, then I think that would be a very, very powerful movement, wouldn't it, for change?
Oh, absolutely.
Brilliant. So talking about the fact that you mentioned that it's, even though this has come up in conversation a lot more now, pronouns is a very new thing, so to speak, in the way that people are using them the way that they are now, even though obviously pronouns are just pronouns. But like something that's really come up is that people are speaking out a lot more now, and they're coming out a lot more. So you can see it across the age ranges. So I think I was looking at some data around it, and ONS found that I think it was the rates of those in the LGBT community who were under 16 have doubled in the last few years. You've got, I think it's around 3 to 4% of people over 16 in Britain are part of the LGBT community, and I think those over 65, that increase is huge now, and people actually sharing their orientation. So it's really, I think people are coming out a lot more now than ever before, from what I can see.
They are. I think it's still a bit odd that in 2022 we have to talk about coming out.
Yeah.
Why should it matter? But again, that's based on the fact we live in a world where it's presumed that you're heterosexual and cis. Sorry, that's another bit of terminology. That just means not trans, means you are happy and identify with the gender that corresponds to your sex at birth. So, it's still based on that assumption. So to come out is still something that is felt to be important to do. And I think for LGBTQ plus people, that power of coming out is very much about, this is me saying, this is who I am, this is who I love and how I identify in terms of my gender identity. And there's a great power and positivity, and it's fantastic to see famous people. Recently we had Dame Kelly Holmes. That was a really powerful story, talking about how she had to hide her sexuality. And there's still lots of people that is true. So coming out is really important, but I think it's important to remember that you should never force somebody to come out. Certainly celebrities, you'll hear of people that are either so-called outed by the media, or they're forced to come out because they're told, if you don't come out, then we're going to publish a story that says, you are LGBT. So yeah, coming out is powerful. It's terrifying. I remember when I came out as trans, my gosh, it's terrifying. Because, there is always that risk of rejection from family, friends, workplaces. And yes, there's legal protection, but legal protection's one thing. Another thing is sort of, we're all humans, how we're reacted to. So if if your coming out experience is a positive one, that's fantastic for your sense of well-being and affirmation. But obviously, if you get rejected, then my gosh, that can be a huge deal. And I guess also it's important to remember that coming out isn't just a one-time thing. So, I, to use myself as an example, I came out as trans in 2013. I've undergone gender transition. This is who I am. I'm quite open about my trans identity. It's just part of who I am, but I don't try and hide it. But I still have to come out sometimes when I'm speaking to people. There might be discussions around family relationships, or the fact I've got children, or other things like that, and you find yourself thinking, well, do I disclose that I am? Does it matter? No, it doesn't. But would it just help the conversation? And again, it's coming out as an ongoing continuum.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I suppose every time you meet a new person, every time it's not a one-off thing. You almost have to replay that whole just journey every time, don't you?
And make that decision.
Yeah.
A bit like we talked earlier about, what's the language this person using? Do I think I'm going to be safe if I just happen to say to them I'm trans, or that I've got a wife? So yeah, it's an almost daily thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about this in human safety, like you were talking about, we are always naturally as humans, aren't we, scanning our environment to see if we're safe. And we're saying, is that person friend or foe, we're always examining that. And I can imagine that constantly of having to adjust that to, are they going to accept me for this? Are they going to reject me? Do I tell them? Do I not? Is it visible? Is it not? And then add into that obviously the blind identities and visibility as well. That brings in a whole world of constant navigating that.
I mean, there's a word that gets used, hypervigilance.
Yeah.
And I think it's true as LGBT people, as disabled people. You're not paranoid. You're just always, you've got your radar going.
Yeah.
What's the context I'm in? Do I feel physically safe, psychologically safe? Am I being given the right signals by people that this is a place where I can disclose my true identity? Most of the time these days, apart from the voice and the fact I'm quite tall, I will generally, I hate this word, but it gets used, I will generally pass as a woman. And that's great. But there may be occasions when I'm thinking, and it's probably when I'm meeting new people and new environments, you can't help it. And you unconsciously are listening for little signals that somebody might have had a suspicion or not be sure. And similarly with disability, okay, so my visual impairment, my blindness is obvious if you look at my eyes. Although even that people don't always realize. But obviously, for people with hidden disabilities, obviously mental ill health, that's a hidden disability. If you hear somebody use words about these conditions, these issues that you're thinking, I don't like that, then you're much less likely to disclose that you have mental ill health, or you're LGBT, or you're disabled.
Yeah, massively. That's just exhausting to navigate. Exhausting.
Honestly, I think the biggest thing, apart from obviously, like real serious discrimination and abuse, I think the thing with being LGBT and disabled, and anybody who's got those multiple forms of marginalization, oppression, is the exhaustion. Literally every interaction, every encounter, you're scanning, you're thinking, your mind's working. And I know people will say, oh, well, it shouldn't matter what other people think. And in many ways it doesn't. But, we're people, we're humans. If you're having a bad day, you've had a bad week, and you're already feeling a bit vulnerable, then if somebody says something or in my case, misgenders me, as in uses the wrong pronoun, then it's it's going to hurt. I think I've heard it described as sort of the odd occasion is just like a tiny little prick. But obviously, if on a day-to-day basis you have repeated incidents, then that's like lots of little needle pricks, and that does hurt, and that does have an impact. And to carry on the metaphor, sometimes those things take longer to heal than other times.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you think of it from, I'm a heterosexual woman who, I was born a female, I identify as a female. If someone said to me, and because I identify as a female, if someone called me a man, or used pronouns that I didn't identify with, that would hurt. And so if you don't identify with the pronoun and people's not respecting that pronoun, regardless of what you were born like, that's gonna hurt. And then especially if you've got that whole kind of, you're going through this your identity journey, trying to make peace with how you're feeling because society says that you should feel a certain way, like add that whole layer in as well. It's no wonder there's so many people really, really struggling with their mental health in the LGBT community.
Totally. And some people will say, oh, well, stop being so sensitive. It's like, look, that's fine for you to say, but I've got to live this. Every time I go into a shop or a cafe, I've got to think, oh gosh, how are they going to refer to me? Are they going to ask me to repeat my name because they're not convinced I said my name was Sarah? Just things like that. And it does take its toll.
I imagine just thinking again, going back to pronouns again, because obviously there's some resistance around it. Even when pronouns came out originally, I wasn't sure about who should be using them and why. The more I learn about pronouns, the more we move into this discussion around the intersectionality between gender, mental health, LGBT. It's become so important to use pronouns. Obviously it's everyone's own discretion around it, but just the fact of, if someone is constantly hypervigilant and scanning the environment for threats, if you can see someone is using their pronouns, like you said, you can say, even if they're not part of the LGBT community, you can see they're open and they're like accepting of that, pronouns and the whole shift that we're making with gender.
Yeah, I think the key point there is, it's your call. I would encourage people to do that, and I think it sends the right signal. I think it shows allyship if you're not LGBTQ plus. I think it's a powerful thing to use, but no one's out there forcing everybody to use pronouns. Read the Daily Mail. Sorry, Daily Mail. But there is a certain, it's all this woke nonsense, and we're not being forced to. But if you're somebody who wants to show that you're wanting to be inclusive and supportive to friends, family members, colleagues, whoever, it's a real powerful thing to do. And I guess the only thing with that is, yes, having a pronoun on your Zoom handle or your email is great, but don't just stick that on and think, oh, well, I'm sorted now. And we'll touch on this later. Just, if you've got that on there, do at least be prepared if somebody says to you, oh, why have you got your pronouns on there? What's that about? At least be willing to say why you've done it. You don't have to have a full-on academic discussion, but just be willing to say why you're doing that.
I love that. Not Sarah made me.
Well, it's a bit like rainbow lanyards. Yeah, they look fantastic and they're colourful and they're amazing, but don't wear one of those if you're not going to invest some time into what that means and what that stands for. Because the worst thing will be somebody comes up to you who is LGBT and wants to have even an initial discussion, and they see your lanyard or they see your pronoun and they have a discussion and they realize, actually, do you know what? This person's done that, but they haven't got a clue.
So it comes down to a lot of around education, and so educate yourself.
Education is key.
I love that. And I'm going to put a pin in that because I'd love to like really pick into how we
Hmm.
can like educate ourselves, how we can be an ally. Because you're right. I think it's so, so important. So we're talking about, I'd love to kind of carry on thinking about in terms of, the pressures and the distress that can often follow LGBTQ, like the transitioning period or coming out, or even just like, battling with your identity. Because there is a lot of, when you look at the figures, and you wrote a blog, didn't you, for
Hmm.
my website around, and it pulled out a lot of figures around from Stonewall that looked at the prevalence of mental ill health in the community. So I think there was like nearly half of those who identify as trans have tried to take
Hmm.
their own life at some point. And you've got, was it one in 8, I think I've written down. So 1 in 8 between 18 to 24 have attempted to take their own life.
Yep.
You've got 3 in 5 have experienced anxiety, and over 50% experience depression. They're huge figures.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, like, well, are we surprised?
Mm,
Um, I mean, I think it's important to remember that obviously being LGBTQ plus doesn't mean you're going to automatically have mental ill health. But the fact of the matter is, if you are LGBTQ plus, because some of the issues we've mentioned already, and societal attitudes and everything else, it's not going to be surprising that the prevalence of mental ill health is a lot higher than in the non-LGBTQ plus community. I think those statistics are probably also only the tip of the iceberg, because that's
mm,
obviously people that have been willing to identify and disclose.
yeah.
But I think, I know a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, and I would say probably every single one of them at some point in their life has had some form of mental ill health, as you said, be that anxiety, depression. Those are probably the two most common. But
Mm,
there are other aspects, and again, I'm happy to use myself as an example. There's a lot of discussion or thought around, oh well, this whole being trans is just a new phenomenon, it's just a fad, and it's just a lifestyle choice. For me, that decision to transition wasn't just oh, I fancy this. It
mm,
was I need to do this for my own mental well-being.
yeah.
And at that point, I was at the point of saying, look, if I can't do this, if I can't be at peace with who I feel I am and who I know I am, then what's the point of being here?
Yeah.
And I know at that stage of my life, my mental health was really poor. I did have lots of suicidal ideations, and that's just the reality. Because
Mm,
if you can't be yourself, if you can't be authentic about who you want to love and who you feel you are,
mm,
then it's not surprising you're going to think, well, what's the point of being here?
yeah.
Why live in a world that doesn't accept me or allow me to be who I am?
Yeah.
And then obviously, family issues. I was really lucky that my mum, because my dad wasn't around at the point I came out, while she was initially a bit unsure, I I then found, she was great and she was my fiercest ally. But obviously other people, when they come out as LGBTQ plus, they get rejected by family, their existing relationships may break down.
Mm,
There's shocking statistics around the number of young LGBTQ plus people that face homelessness. And a lot of that is around, family rejection. So it's not surprising that these figures are as high as they are. And I think it just demonstrates the more we can do as individuals, as workplaces, to support the LGBTQ plus community, the better.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it does, like you said, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because you've not only got such big moments in people's lives where they're coming out to their friends, their family, potentially facing that rejection, but that that battle with yourself in terms, and if you think, if potentially you might not have the level of confidence and self-esteem to, when people say society is saying these things, is rejecting you, it's very, very hard not to internalize that and feel like you're the person in the wrong because of how you're feeling, especially if you're a young person, when actually there's nothing wrong with it, it's the society, but it's very hard not to carry that yourself.
Totally. I think it works both ways. I think if you're a young person and you're just developing that whole sense of who you are in the world, where you fit, how you relate, um, it's going to have an impact. Or if you're an older person who, like me, grew up in a time where being LGB, because really nobody really talked about the T, was such a negative whole, gosh,
Yeah,
it's only 1980s where the whole thing of Section 28 and the AIDS crisis and all of the issues around that.
yeah,
If you've grown up in that context where you're being perceived as somebody who's abnormal, sick, ill, deviant, all of those negatives, then it's understandable you're going to have internalized that homophobia and transphobia and those negative attitudes towards that.
yeah.
And if you're not in a place where you can receive family support, professional support, it's completely understandable that it's going to have an impact.
Yeah, completely natural, isn't it? There's only some countries it's actually illegal. Like it's ridiculous when you think about it.
2022, honestly, being LGBT is still illegal, and you could face death simply by identifying by being LGBT.
Yes.
Yeah. What is, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't even wrap my head around that.
Nope.
Yeah, it was like we've got a long way. That's the thing, we've got, even though, the fact that, and popular is very, very much the wrong word to use, but the fact that it's very much in the forefront of people's minds at the moment, isn't it? And I think that is helping conversation start, things to shift. And I like the fact that you can actually have a small minority of people who can instigate impressive change, but we still, and I think it's important to remember that we still have a very, very long way to go. Like, we're definitely not there yet.
No, I mean, there's been great advances. We've got gay marriage. I mentioned Kelly Holmes earlier. It's not an offense to be LGBTQ and be in the army, things like that. There's been great strides, great improvements, but we still live in a world where, even here in the UK, to be LGB and particularly T trans, there's a very small but vocal minority of people that are very anti and won't change. But equally, there's again a very small and active pool of activists, campaigners, people like myself that, look, we're not trying to turn everybody LGBT. We're just saying, look, we're here. I know they said, we're here, we're queer, and we ain't going away. We're here, we exist. Take time to get to know us, realize that, my gosh, we have relationships, we have families, we work, we do sports, we need medical care, we go shopping, we do everything that everybody else does. The only thing that's different is who we choose to love or how we choose to identify or express our gender.
Yeah.
And again, if you believe some of the discussion out there, there's this powerful trans lobby. No, we're not. We're not the ones that get to put the articles in the media and do the reports on the news and radio. We're just the ones trying to say to people, all we want is to have not even just acceptance, we want those rights to live our lives without fear of rejection, persecution, discrimination. And that's not to say that our rights take precedence over anybody else's, but we're just saying, look, we have the right to exist and to be here and to live our authentic lives. And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, 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 I love that. There's space for everyone to be whoever they want to be.
Totally. And yes, it does sometimes get a little complicated when you come down to certain legal nuances. But again, there's usually a way through that. As long as you come at that with a sense of a willingness to learn and educate and not just a blinkered, well, this is wrong. We need to stamp out these LGBTQ plus people. Then there's always a way.
Yeah, I like that. So that brings us really nicely onto, so how do you become an ally? And so we've spoken about pronouns and the importance of using them to obviously show someone that you're open, that you're there and you support it even if you're not part of the LGBT community. And then also we spoke about how that not just to put them on your email, not just to put them on your Zoom handle, but actually educate yourself why they're being used and what the differences are between gender, identity, etc. What else would you say like helpful? Give me one that would be incredibly powerful as an ally.
I mean, there's loads of things you could do, but I think the key two key points: listen and learn. We've touched on them, but I think as an ally, whether it's an ally of LGBTQ plus people, disabled people, people with mental ill health, whatever, race, whatever it might be, if you want to be an ally and a ally that can make a real difference, you do need to make that commitment to listen to the people, the community you want to be an ally for. Don't just come at it with, well, yes, I know about such and such because I've got a gay friend. It's like, well, that's great. But just because you've got a gay friend doesn't mean you know everything there is about being LGBT. And so take the time, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in your family or just more generally, take the time to listen to the voices of LGBTQ plus people. Find out what they're saying, why they're saying it, what are the issues they're saying, and spend more time listening than speaking. Don't ever, take the place of an LGBTQ plus people talking on these issues. There's a lot of stuff in workplaces about LGBTQ plus ally groups and LGBTQ plus networks that welcome allies, and I think that's fantastic. There is a real positive, powerful message in that. But the voice that's heard the most should be the voice of that person that you're, from that community. So listening is key. And gosh, Rebecca, you could do a whole podcast on this. You probably have, the whole thing of active listening.
Yeah.
Not just listening, but having half a mind on what you're going to have for dinner or whatever. But really actively listening to what's the person saying, how they're saying it, what might that be behind it, and trying to understand. And then learning, as you listen, you learn. Take the time to find out things like, as we've touched on, issues around the language that's used, a bit of the history. Why do we have pride? Why is pride important? What does pride mean? Who are perhaps some famous LGBTQ plus people? You might find some things that surprise you. What are the issues that impact? And don't just go to your mainstream tabloids. Check out some of the organizations that work in this area. There's some great resources out there. But yeah, really commit to listening and learning, because I think that's the way we make any real change, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'd love to find out a bit more about what you said about in terms of the voice of those speaking should be those from the
Hmm.
LGBT community. Want that, and I absolutely support that. From my point of view of not being within that community, how do I become a voice of support for you without taking over? Because that's going to be a hard one to navigate, isn't it? You got any tips around that?
Yeah, I think, look, what I'm not saying is if you're in a work meeting or if you're in a training context, as I know you do, and somebody says something that is LGBTQ plus phobic, I'm not saying you shouldn't speak up and say, well, actually, that's not necessarily true, or not all gay people are like that, or that's not what being trans means, you know. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever speak up. I mean, obviously, you should only do that if you feel comfortable and able to do that. But I guess it's things like, yes, you could educate your own family members or friends or whoever who may not be LGBTQ plus, but if it's perhaps something a bit more formal, a bit more professional, a bit more corporate, always getting somebody from that community who has that lived experience to talk about it. Now, yes, Rebecca, you're the mental health professional. It would be you talking about the specifics of mental health, and a bit like we're doing on this podcast, but getting in somebody from an LGBTQ plus perspective to share their experience and to sort of, if you like, give that sense of, well, this is what it really means. This is how it really impacts. So that's where I think there is that real power in that.
Yeah, I love that. And if you're gonna actually hold the attention of people and get that kind of people buy-in, you need to come from a position of lived experience, don't you, to actually go, this is what it's like, rather than someone talking about something they've read or something they've heard.
Honestly, it really bugs me in you might hear a so-called debate or discussion on LGBT issues, and you look at the panel or the discussion, think, well, wait a minute. As far as I'm aware, there's no LGBTQ plus person there. Now, understandably, some people in the LGBTQ plus community just won't engage because they're fed up with the toxic coverage that there sometimes is. So they're like, look, no, I'm not going to engage. But equally, a lot of the times, I don't even think organisers necessarily think about who they've got on a panel discussion or who they've got on a training event, or not even something as specific as that, but on whatever you're doing, be it a event or some training or just anything, making sure that you look at it from the perspective of people who are, excuse me, reading it, watching it, listening to it, aren't all going to be white, heterosexual, cis men.
Yeah.
The assumptions we make, honestly, it says a lot about us at times.
Yeah, and that kind of feeding that equality, diversity, inclusion throughout everything you do, and that training and education has got to come down, training around mental health and understanding it truly, training around EDI, really understanding what that looks like, not just understanding the theory behind it, but what does it look like in practice? How do we embed it into the culture? What do the behaviors behind it look like, rather than just the words around it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always going to be a space for the likes of you and I as specialists in this. But really, a lot of it can be embedded if you look at just being more inclusive generally, and just having that intersectional lens that looks at issues through, okay, what about if you're LGBT and disabled and BME or whatever? What's this going to mean for you? How is this going to impact, and how can I address that?
Yeah, it's being open to, and one of the things we look at on the mental health first aid course is understanding that you see the world through your own frame of reference. So you see the world, a particular way because of your gender, your identity, whether you're disabled or not, your education, your all these things frame how you see the world. So it's almost like opening up and understanding everyone has their own frame of reference, and how can you create a workplace that kind of brings all that in together, and understanding it from different frame of references.
Completely. I mean, look, I've mentioned where I grew up. I grew up in, Northumberland in the 70s and 80s. So I couldn't help. Even, I didn't really know I was LGBTQ plus for quite a while. But, I was exposed to those negative attitudes and stereotypes. That's what I had. So initially, I came at my own issues with that framework of it's shameful, it's sinful, it's bad, it's horrible. And then even in terms of my own disability, and then coming out as trans, I thought, well, I'm disabled. I've lived my life with a disability. I know what it means in terms of equality and prejudice and stereotypes. I got a shock, because because I knew what it meant in terms of disability, I didn't, I had to take some time to learn things in the LGBTQ plus community and to navigate that world as a disabled person. So I think we should always be learning, developing, and expanding our frame of reference to realize that there's a big world out there, and we're all this complex tapestry of different identities and cultures and everything. And that's not a bad thing. That's a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
That's how we learn and develop and grow as a society, as humanity, if you like.
Yeah. Think how boring the world would be if we were all exactly the same.
Oh, if everybody was like me, oh no, please, that would be horrible. I'd drive myself to distraction.
But it's the diversity in this world that makes it, an enjoyable place to be, isn't it? We want diversity. We want difference in opinion. We want, it's being open to sometimes understanding that your opinion's not always correct, or that your opinion maybe not, not most educated in certain areas, and that's okay. And I think, like you said, if you've always got that growth mindset of being open to learning, open to development, open to asking questions, open to starting the more difficult conversations, then you can really just be open to creating a very, very inclusive workplace and just society in general.
I mean, I think so, and obviously you think so, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And I think most people think that way. And yes, it's a bit scary at times, and it's a bit challenging.
Yeah.
But as you said, if you want to grow as a person, and if we want to grow as a society and a culture and a humanity, then that's how we grow, by being exposed to difference of opinion and thoughts. And again, look, that's all got to be within the context of safety. And I'm not saying anything goes, because it doesn't. There are frameworks, there are laws, there are standards of sort of ethics, morality, although even those, we should be willing to have those challenged at times. But the general point is, diversity is not a bad word. Diversity is a good thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a wonderful kind of point to bring this to a close on. So that we are continuing this conversation, aren't we, Sarah?
We are.
Which is very exciting. So we're going to be running a workshop online, so a little webinar on October the 4th. And we're going to be running this to talk and dig into this more deeply, to understand that connection between mental health and LGBT plus community, and seeing how we can better support those in the community, better support ourselves if we belong to that community, and also create more support within the workplace as well. So me and Sarah will be delivering that together, starting the conversation. There'll be lots of place to kind of ask questions and you to find out a bit more for you in terms of how you can support people better. And we will put the link and all the information under this podcast as well for you to join us, which will be fantastic.
I can't wait. I can't wait, Rebecca.
It will be great. Anything else you'd like to close on, Sarah?
Oh my gosh. No, just honestly, in the spirit of what I said a minute ago, thank you to every one of you that's taken the time to listen and watch this podcast. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you at the course.
Yes, be brilliant. You can find me and Sarah on LinkedIn. So Sarah Stephenson-Hunter and Rebecca Reed. And we have our own websites as well. Mine's www.siendo.co.uk. And I believe yours is simplyequality.com.
Simplyequality.com. That's where you can go and read a bit more about me and find my podcast as well.
Yeah. Brilliant. We'll put that all in the links below. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And we look forward to talking to you all again.
Bye.
Bye.